This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on challenges at COP-26 summit. The participants are Dr. C.K. Varshne, environmentalist, and Sanjay Jha, journalist.
12 years ago, at a United Nations Climate Summit in Copenhagen, rich nations made a significant pledge. They promised to channel $100 billion a year to less wealthy nations, developing countries, by 2020 to help them adapt to climate change and mitigate further rises in temperature. Now we are just a few days ahead of the global summit COP26, which is going to take place in the Scottish city of Glasgow. The focus seems to have again turned to climate finance. Countries are going to argue for more money to mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change. And this important place before the upcoming climate change conference, it seems to have not been met, and money is not sure to be available before 2023. Professor Varshne, what do you think about the intent of the rich and industrialized nations for not fulfilling this important commitment?
I think that, as you have rightly said, that $100 billion were to be provided by the rich countries to the poor developing countries to really meet their adaptation as well as adopt means of containing carbon emission to maintain the temperature within the Paris Climate Agreement, that is below 2 degrees centigrade or 2 degrees centigrade. Now, this commitment has not been met very clearly, and the developed countries are dragging their feet, which is shaking the confidence of the global community about their seriousness of their commitment as well as of the implementation, what they really pledged for. We have seen that for quite good period of time, America was really out of the Paris Agreement. Now they have joined. But this kind of a behavior really shakes the confidence of the global community. I must say that there are lots of problems with whatever they have committed because they have not decided which country is going to contribute how much. So I think it's a very fluid and they don't seem to be very serious. Let me also mention that $100 billion is a minuscule amount. In fact, the developing countries, if they have to adopt and if they have to confirm their energy use as per the Paris Agreement objective, then trillions of dollars will be needed. However, if they have really met their commitment, it would have really given some kind of a confidence and encouraged them to really provide more aggressive commitments to put on the table at the Glasgow. Failing which, it seems that there are all kinds of issues which are really blocking this kind of commitment which they have. Very recently, Canada and Australia have announced that they will not be able to meet their $100 billion commitment at Glasgow. And they think that this will be possible for them only by 2023, which means there is going to be a delay of 3 years, even for this $100 billion, which is absolutely minuscule for taking care of the aggressive commitment that they expect from the developing countries and the world community.
As you said that this obviously the developed country have failed to fulfill their promise, and that is leading to the frustrations. So frustration at this failure by the rich nations could be contributing to rising tensions ahead of crucial climate summit taking place in Glasgow. Now, negotiations will be obviously focusing on raising even more money after 2025 because 100 billion is not nearly enough, as we know, because this was just a starting fund to get developing countries to poor countries to commit to the global, to cut the carbon emissions in their respective countries, and also to help these countries to achieve their national climate commitments. Do you think in this scenario, the countries who are going to be asked or rather forced to commit to these, they will be sort of giving more commitment?
No, I think that is not seems to be the case because they have already announced that they will not be able to meet their commitment. And it is only after 3 years, possibly they will be able to really meet their commitment, which completely really shows that how lightly they have taken their pledges. And once you have this kind of an attitude, I think it weakens the willpower and the country's commitments to place more aggressive targets on the table on a meeting like this. So COP26 is going to be first thing where the climate financing will be discussed. And the other important point that one must remember is that the accounting of the fund that they are talking about is also in doldrum, is not very clear, and they are trying to interpret in a very, very interesting and a funny manner. There are three kinds of financing that is available: bilateral, multilateral, export credit, and private finance. And whatever has been so far given is actually the bilateral finance, and the multilateral finance component is very small, and rest of it is export credit, which is really not the grant or the money that they are really committing for, but it is only some kind of a, I should say, borrowing kind of a arrangement that they are really talking about and putting the whole thing as the money that they have really provided for. So I think there is a lot of difficulty with respect to the accounting of this money. How this is going to be distributed is not very clear, and therefore all these things are to be straightened out. And in fact, what one was expecting, that at the COP-26 at Glasgow meeting, the developed countries will come voluntarily and say that this is how we are going to further enhance the kind of commitment that we have made. The adaptation fund is very important because the developed countries are suffering on account of the emissions that the developed countries have so far been doing unabated, and as a result they are suffering. You know, the recent report has come where India has suffered billions of dollars of damage because of the climate change that we are experiencing. You have seen the kind of flood that has happened in the north. You have seen how the Kerala is suffering from the recurring flood fury year after year, and you can see that many coastal states and particularly the Pacific islands are really suffering a great deal. And all this is really undermining their infrastructure which they have been able to create, and also really taking up the life and the livelihood of the people. So I think all these things require money, and therefore the kind of preparedness or the kind of gesture that was expected is absolutely wanting. And at the same time, we find that they are backtracking on their pledges that they have made. So unless these pledges are adhered to, sincerity will not come, and thus we are not able to create a climate which has to be created in order to really contain this global warming and the climate change issue, which is so serious and which is so, I should say, has got ramification and consequences for the future generation and well-being of the people.
You spoke about the challenges for the developing countries. India, which is a very, very important player as the second most populous country, the third emitter, and India has again reiterated that efforts to avoid emissions during the development process are tied to the availability and level of international financing and technology transfer, since most of the developing countries still face complex developmental challenges. Speaking at a Middle East conference, Indian Environment Minister has clearly said COP26 must deliver concrete action plan on climate finance and technology transfer. Otherwise, this whole summit would not achieve what it is intended for. What do you think India should be talking about?
No, I think India is very clear that it is an issue which requires immediate attention as well as commitment by the emitters of the warming gases and the kind of the legacy emission that they have. They need to change their lifestyle dramatically and come forward to show and suggest that how in a time-bound manner they are going to contain the emission of warming gases from now on in a very rigorous manner and in a very significant quantities. Unless that is there, it will not be possible for any one country to do enough. India has been very, very straightforward and taking very forward-looking decisions. We have got Global Alliance, which ultimately also got the UN, I should say, approval. And for that, India has also proposed one sun, one world, one grid. Now, this kind of an proposal is something which requires commitment from the countries. For this, as it will have a great impact in reducing carbon emission. But this requires capital investment, and for that again finances are needed. And therefore it is time that this proposal which India has been proposing must also be financed, and countries must forward to provide the necessary finance for this, so that a clean energy permanent source may be available, because sun shines all the 24 hours, but in some places it is dark and some places there is a sunlight. So one can really compensate from one area to another if we really see that one sun, one world and one grid concept gets implemented, and it is really gets the support as well as the required financing over a period of time to make it happen, and as a viable alternative to the fossil fuels that are being consumed in larger and larger quantity. So I think you have mentioned that India is third emitter, but I think it is important for us to know that our total contribution at present is only 7% out of 100. So I think although we are third, but the difference between the second and the third is a huge. And also if we take per capita emission of carbon dioxide, then we are well below the global average. So I think all these things have to be said along with this when we say that we are the third largest emitter. In fact, look at our population and look at the developmental stage. We have not really used any of the carbon space which others have already utilized, and have left very little for other countries to make use of. So I think here is also a question of carbon justice or environmental justice that is really required, to which the developed countries must come forward and actually provide space by making deep cuts in their own emission. Instead, they are talking of net emission or net zero. Now, this is something which means that they should continue to emit as much as they are doing now, except that they will not really add any further. And that is not a very happy situation. So I think these are some of the things which we have to be very careful. And without making any commitment of net zero, I think we should really insist of commitments and deep cuts into the emission by the developed countries, and also enhance the stepping up of the financing for the developing countries to really invest in their adaptation to make up for the losses that they are suffering because of the global warming and climate change that is taking place.
We discussed about the challenges with the financing of this. We have also seen the developed countries are deterring from technology transfer. One can understand the money part, they are not yet contributed. But if they're really serious about cutting carbon emission in the developing and poor countries, what is stopping them from necessary technology transfers to these countries?
So I think they are very serious about it. They just don't want to really commit anything on this account. This is very simple and straightforward. For a simple reason that in this meeting at Glasgow, like many other meetings earlier, there are people from industry and they have a lobby. And this lobby doesn't really allow this kind of a thing to happen, because then they say that innovation and the incentive for innovation for more important technologies to come for reducing carbon emission will not take place if we do not keep this as an important consideration. So I think this question of giving up the patents and giving up the technology transfer free of cost for the developing countries freely and happily doesn't exist. I mean, this kind of a thing is very cautiously guarded through the negotiating, I should say, somersaulting and all kinds of diplomatic maneuvering. So I think these are the considerations which are really holding them back to commit on these, because they are the one which are going to also not completely sacrifice the interest of their industry. And thus we find that there are serious issues about it, and it is an issue which is still waxing and will continue to be discussed.
Hope and we pray that rich nations, industrialized nations, should contribute and fulfill their pledges so the world can become a safer and better place. Thank you for your time, Professor Varshney.
Expectations from G20 and COP-26 summits. The participants are Atul Aneja, International Affairs expert, and Manas Pratim Bhuyan, journalist.
The powerful G20 grouping is holding a two-day summit from October 30 to 31st in the Italian city of Rome. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is traveling to Italy tomorrow to participate in the two-day summit, which is expected to deliberate extensively on various global challenges and to find ways to deal with them, particularly the coronavirus pandemic. It has created economic devastation across the world, and the G20 leaders are expected to deliberate on ways to recovery, particularly economic recovery as well as health recovery. The Foreign Secretary of India, Harshvardhan Shringla, today addressed a press conference in which he outlined various aspects of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Rome to participate in the G20 summit and his visit thereafter to Glasgow to attend the COP-26 Leaders Summit. Let's listen in what Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla said today.
G20 as well as COP26, as you know, these are both back-to-back summits. The global agenda on climate change and energy transition is the focus for both these summits. So G20 will also consider climate change, of course, and as we move into more specialized focus on climate change at the COP26. Today, the G20 represents approximately 80% of the world's GDP, 75% of global trade, and 60% of the world's population. Thus, it is fitting to say that over time, the G20 has emerged as not only the premier global forum for international economic cooperation, but also an important platform to exchange, innovate, and deliberate on policy issues that have a direct and tangible impact on the quality of life of our citizens. The G20's success and continued relevance can be measured by its immediate response to the COVID-19 pandemic and its focus on sustainable and resilient economic recovery from the pandemic. As a founding member of the G20, India has always been a proactive and positive player in its processes, speaking not only for itself but also for the larger developing world. Italy's theme for the G20 summit for its presidency is People, Planet, Prosperity. It actually comes from the 2030 UN Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the focus of Italy is on recovery from the pandemic and strengthening global health governance, economic recovery and resilience, climate change and energy transition, and sustainable development and food security. India fully supports the priority areas chosen by Italy. We have been a strong advocate in the G20 for supporting equitable and affordable access to COVID-19 disease control tools, including vaccines, therapeutics and diagnostics, through technology transfer, diversification of supply chains and production hubs. As a result of our efforts, the G20 has recognized that extensive vaccination is a global public good. And I have to again emphasize that this has been our contribution in the G20 lexicon that would be evident at the summit.
So, Mr. Anuj, how do you see the G20 summit and what is your expectation from the G20 Leaders Summit at the Italian city of Rome?
Very important to know the context of this meeting. As you have yourself mentioned, that this is taking place at a time when we are moving out of coronavirus pandemic. We are not been fully out of the woods, but the trend line is good. So the context essentially is how do we plan post-COVID world? Because COVID has caused enormous disruption in terms of economy, in terms of supply lines, healthcare systems, even geopolitical issues. So it has had a cascading effect on all aspects of human endeavor. So we have to actually relink the broken links in which an integrated world existed before the COVID-19. So that is where it is. The agenda, therefore, is very vast. How do you rebuild a post-COVID world? I mean, that is where you have to restart in a way, you're restarting life in a way, in a new era. A grouping which is the most powerful grouping. And so you're also looking forward and anticipating problems that will come ahead of a strategic nature. Things like climate change. Now, these are issues which are will impact the human race for a very, very long time. So therefore, you're going to set basic strategies for such big undertakings, which will confront humanity in the coming decades, if not longer. Then you also have, Manas, many geopolitical problems which have come in. And I think that, for example, the Afghan situation, it has had a huge footprint over a vast region. And in fact, it has impacted the entire globe, right from developed countries like the United States down to Iran to India, neighboring countries, Central Asia, Russia. So it's a global event which took place. I'm just giving you an illustration for one. There are many other such developments of a geopolitical nature which need to be addressed in a collaborative manner. I think that this summit gives an opportunity to start the deliberations on how do we keep a more livable, a safer world, and a world which is less prone to conflict, because the challenges have increased. I think one more thing which will link to climate change, Manas, would be energy security. And because there is one level, there is a transition going on from conventional energy, which is a hydrocarbon driven energy, to renewable energy. And it's not an easy transition to take place. And, if we don't get it right, then there are serious implications on the way. So I think global energy security will be another major issue, which is likely to be addressed by these most powerful countries of the world.
So in the course of the coronavirus pandemic, India quite regularly pressed for a comprehensive global strategy to deal with coronavirus pandemic, including dealing with the health aspects as well as economic aspects. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to again pitch for a united global approach to deal with the challenge of COVID-19 as well as to deal with future pandemics. So do you think the upcoming G20 summit in Italy is expected to come out with a concrete outcome in terms of dealing with the health disasters and economic fallout of the disasters?
I think there will be these roadmaps ahead of a post-COVID world. Now, there will be various areas, and they will be driven by the achievement of SDG goals, that is, SDG goals as defined by the United Nations. So I think that is something which will be the guiding light, and what happens, the new initiatives which are taken will be dovetailed to achieve that grand objective. So I think that is going to very strongly concretize during the G20 summit. I think there's one thing which India can do, which can supplement our initiatives in healthcare sector, and along with South Africa, look at the patents regime which we have taken to the WTO jointly, and which the United States also supports. I think physical security in the Indo-Pacific region, it actually is an extension of what we did in 2004 during the Asian tsunami. That is humanitarian resistance and disaster relief. I think that kind of initiative in the Indian Ocean region, from, let's say, the east coast of Africa down to Malacca, the HADR, the humanitarian disaster relief, I think that's one more thing which India can do and contribute on a regional, if not a global level. I think there is a vast area which is now open, because we are in a fluid situation now. And as we get out of coronavirus, I think we must keep our eyes and ears open and our minds open to seek new opportunities. And those opportunities will be dovetailed to our capabilities, our capacities and strengths, are accrued to the developing world. And I think over here, India can play a very major role. I think any kind of transition, though it may appear very negative, has its own opportunities. I think India now has an opportunity to explore and to promote certain niche areas which are its USP. For example, if you talk about the post-COVID world, Manas, we have already flagged it that India can be a bigger pharmacy of the world than even before. In terms of vaccine development, India as a global hub, I think that is a very important point. And India's own Atmanirbhar Bharat of making products in India for the world, I think that itself is an opportunity in the post-COVID world, because as I said earlier, the older supply chains have sort of either been twisted or have been broken. So when you build new supply chains, I think India can leverage its natural advantages and channel them through the G20 network. So I think there's a very big opportunity for India if we get our act together and are focused and clear about the roadmaps ahead. I think we can do a lot in collaboration with developed world and link it up to the developing world.
So the economic recovery is a major aspect of the deliberations among global leaders, and India has actually proposed the mutually acceptable COVID-19 vaccine certification framework to its various partners, primarily to ensure that a simplified international travel regime would help in just bringing tourism back, and it can create a lot of economic activities, and that way, in fact, even smaller countries like Maldives or many other countries in the Indo-Pacific region can benefit from it. So do you think, Mr. Anuj, that there's a need for a global framework to ensure easy travel, actually, to lift restrictions on travel, so that in fact, there is economic activity, there is tourism. India has been pressing for it. Do you think it's time that forums like G20 come out with some concrete plan to boost tourism, to ease travel restrictions, and to promote basically economic activities through tourism?
I agree completely, Manas. The tourism is a very major sector, and India rightly is focusing on it. We recently had the new airport coming up in Kushinagar, which is an international site for pilgrim tourism related to Buddhism. So that's just one example that tourism is no longer, it's very globalized. And India is one of the major tourism hubs, at least potentially one of the major tourism hubs of the world. So that is a huge potential. But then in order to promote tourism, we also have to contain COVID-19 completely. And I think that's where the two go together, the tourism initiative and the vaccine initiative. Because as progress beyond the 1 billion doses, which is a massive achievement after being hit by the second COVID wave, now is the time for India to export these vaccines so that the entire, or especially in the developing countries, that people, and even in the developed countries, that people are free of COVID. Once people are free of COVID, then we come back to tourism sector. I mean, the two have to go together. I'm not saying that you do one and then the other will start. There is a connection between both the initiatives. So I think that is something which India should push, because if you do not contain COVID and we do not have the revival of flights as they used to be, and people fear for their lives because of travel, then I'm afraid the tourism initiative is not going to go. So I think we have to very aggressively push for this double engine approach of pushing forward with the vaccinations.
Mr. Anuj, from Rome, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will travel to Glasgow to attend the World Leaders Summit of the 26th Conference of Parties, which is briefly called COP-26. And COP-26 is being this time billed as one of the biggest ever congregation of world leaders and experts to combat climate change. And Prime Minister Modi is going there to Glasgow on a 3-day visit. He is leaving for Glasgow from Rome on the evening of 31st October, and he will return to India on the 2nd. So how do you see Prime Minister's visit to Glasgow to attend the COP26 Leaders Summit? And what could be his outlook to deal with this pressing challenge of climate change? India has been maintaining that the rich countries should do more to combat the challenge, and India has been consistently following this policy. So how do you see the COP26 and Prime Minister's participation in the Leaders Summit?
I think one is exceptionally important because India has a very concrete roadmap now towards the 2050 goal of net zero carbon footprint. I mean, I think that's already there. We have a plan of 450 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. Then there are major initiatives where India, now France has joined India for the Solar Alliance to take it forward. India has joined Sweden for what is called the Leadership Group for Industrial Transition, which has Sweden as a main partner. So India's plans from domestic to global, the roadmap is very clear. And it's this proactive approach which the world now recognizes. So Prime Minister Modi's intervention will play a major role in energizing the concrete steps towards achieving clean energy goals, as well as arresting, most importantly, climate change, which is a cause of so much of stress, disasters to various parts of the globe. This visit will be very important. I think there's one more thing which the Prime Minister will be able to do is, while we go ahead for achieving these major goals, I mean, we cannot lose sight of realism and balance here. That you cannot achieve these goals overnight, and you cannot eliminate hydrocarbons in a jiffy. You need natural gas, you need oil. I mean, that is not over. I think the contribution is balance and a smooth transition in a very realistic manner which is not impacting the livelihoods of poor people, not only in India, but in various parts of the globe. Ideally suited to push for renewable energy and energy transition. And at the same time, being where we are, to strike that balance and that sort of sensitize global leaders that you've got to have a balanced approach over here. And we cannot go from energy transition to energy fundamentalism.
Thank you, Mr. Anuj, for your in-depth analysis of the expectations as well as possible outcome at the G20 summit as well as COP26 crucial meet on climate change. Thank you so very much.